right, now we're going to talk about the building's impact on financial performance. Now, the building is a big part of the business, and in a hotel, it could be argued that is the product. Your building is the product. Each individual room is the product. So it has a huge impact on the success or failure and the financial health of the company. And this goes beyond maintenance and things. It's the decisions on what to buy, what to build, what to renovate, and things of that nature when it comes to the building. All right. So we have to make sure that we're making wise decisions. And so a few things we have to take into consideration is it's estimated that 25% of a building's lifetime cost is in the construction. Okay. 75% of the cost are maintenance throughout its lifetime. So that might seem that the construction is not that big of a deal, but 25% is a lot of money when you consider a building you might have a building for 50, 60, 100 years, right? So we need to make sure that we're making the right decisions and we're not spending too much on the building because the more expensive the building is, the more expensive the maintenance is going to be. All right, so what we want to talk about, and not just the building, but the equipment too, right? Or decisions or systems within the building, like a roof. You make a decision on a roof. There's many, you can do a cheap route or expensive route. The cheap route, less money up front, but you're probably going to spend more money in the long run, right? We all know that. We get what we pay for. And basically, you have to take into consideration the simple payback method, right? Simple payback method is nothing more than figuring out how long it will take something, the more expensive option to pay for itself. Okay, so let's talk about a roof. Okay, so we've got all these things going on to the roof. One roof is $10,000 more than another. Okay, so the $10,000 more roof, that's a lot of money when you're considering one's $35,000, one's $55,000 or $45,000, right? So $10,000, that's a quarter of the cost you're talking about, or about a quarter of the cost. All right, so that's a lot of money. However, if you look at it and you think about, believe it or not, there's a lot of different things that a roof does for you. All right, a lot of different ways that you spend money, continues to spend money on a cheaper roof than you would on an expensive roof. A more expensive roof is going to have better insulation value, right? It's going to cause your energy costs to be reduced, right? And you can look into those things when you're making those options. You can figure out, you can find out how it affects your utility cost, right? So you find out that you're going to save so many dollars a year on utility costs. Maintenance, the more expensive one is much less money on maintenance because it's built to last. All the other things, right? You're going to look at all those stuff and you're going to figure out, you're going to add up the yearly savings and apply that to the increase in money you're paying for the more expensive option. You divide the two and you find out that it's going to take you, with the more expensive option, it takes you 4 or 5 years, or 4.5 years, or 5 years, or 6 years, or 2 years for that money in savings to reach the point that the more expensive option pays for itself, right? So that sounds great, right? So yes, they're always going to pay for themselves. If there's any savings at all, it's going to pay for itself. But let's just talk about that roof. If it takes 20 years for it to pay for themselves, and your typical roof, you get 30 years out of it, it's still good, but you want to make sure that you're taking that into account. You want to do the math, because let's talk about a walk-in cooler or a piece of equipment that built into a property. Those things don't last forever. They have life expectancies. So if you think you're going to get 15 or 20 years, let's say 20 years out of this piece of equipment, and break-even point or your payback is 4 years, well, then it's a no-brainer. Absolutely, that's 9 years that you're in the gravy, right? So it's good. 11 years. Wow. Okay. So that's a decision that you can make, and you have the numbers to make it. Now, is it always going to be what you estimate it to be? No. But that's why you wouldn't want to do it. Say, the life expectancy is 10 years, and your payback is 9. You wouldn't want to do that, right? But 4 years and the payback's 15 years. Yeah, that's not a problem. But you do want to make that distinction, because sometimes a salesman will tell you, "Oh, you're going to save so much on money on this bill or that bill or whatever," and you're going to juggle the money. It's like, can I have the more money up front, less money along the line? But like I said, the salesman's going to just focus on the savings and not compare the savings to the increased cost. So when you can compare the savings to the increased cost, and your payback is 10 years, that's a roll of dice you might not want to take. Okay, now, so anyway, I mean, there's many other things to consider, of course, with performance and all that other stuff. But the bottom line is, you need to take those things into consideration. You need to do the math and see when your payback is, and then look at the other things like improved performance of your people who are using the machinery, or the ease of maintenance or ease of use. Um, sometimes a piece of equipment or something that we're making a decision on is got value way beyond the actual cost savings. Like, if we're deciding on that roof, and one is just an ugly asphalt roof, and the other one, the one that's more expensive, uh, is got this slate look, and it just looks much more dramatic, then there's value in that as well. I think I'm getting ahead of myself, but let's keep going. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is capital expense planning. Capital expense is those big expenses, like replacing a huge piece of machinery within a hotel, replacing an elevator. That would be a huge capital expense. Um, Things like that, roofs, remodels, stuff like that. So those are capital expenses, all right? Those are going to be things that are very, very expensive. Now, how do you pay for these things? Well, a lot of places would say that they want to, or back in the day, they used to, for hotels, you would have a rolling budget of every 8-10 years, but you would have money set aside for the big projects every 8 to 10 years. But now they're saying it's more like 3 to 5, because some of those big muscle movements, some of those expensive projects are going to be your remodeling. Well, 8 to 10 years, 10 years without a remodel is a long time in this world that we live in now. You think about the decor and the styling of something 10 years ago. That it could be pretty dramatic. If you walk into a property and the styling is 10 years out of date. Um, some people wouldn't care, and it also depends on the property, right? I mean, some properties, I kind of think it's kind of charming to go into some hotels that haven't changed since 1956. But bottom line is, generally speaking, in the industry today, for hotels and even restaurants, remodeling or some kind of remodeling should be done every 3 to 5 years. And so how we pay for it, like we said, right? We have it in the budget, but you need to pay for it. So there's many different ways to pay for capital expenses. The thing you should always have is you should have a replacement reserve fund, right? You should be putting into your reserve fund 3 to 5% of your gross revenue every year should go into that reserve fund, right? Now, a lot of people want to do this. So small restaurants will try to have that reserve fund with 3 to 5% of revenue. And then something happens and they just can't do it, or revenues aren't what they think they're going to be. So life happens, business happens, downturns, whatever. But the ideal is 3 to 5%. Now, sometimes in those big capital expenses, you have to do. right? Um, Sometimes remodels are super, super necessary. If you don't do a remodel, part of the remodel is upgrades, right? If you think about a place that hasn't remodeled in 20 years, okay? A place that hasn't remodeled in 20 years doesn't have Wi-Fi, or it's kind of like, their Wi-Fi and their modern infrastructure is not what people expect. You don't walk into a room and you have keys for the doors instead of cards. You don't have uh, um, your little plugs. I'm an old man. Uh, the little computer plugs. These things or whatever. You don't have. People expect that now. They expect to go to a hotel and be able to plug their phone right into the wall without having to have a box, the little box or whatever. Okay. Um, if you're not up to date, you could get left behind, right? So sometimes you have to do it. What do you do if you don't have a reserve or a replacement fund? All right. Now you're starting to get into some dangerous territory. What are you going to do? Well, you can get a loan, a mortgage, right? A second mortgage or a loan. There's a lot of risk involved in that. I mean, you have to take, whatever the Fed is saying that the mortgage rates are at the time, that's what you're going to pay. The interest rates are going to pay. You might not be able to secure a loan, right? Um, Unless you're very healthy, sometimes banks don't want to um, give you money. And if you're not healthy, that's the point where you don't have the reserve fund, right? And so you need a loan. So it's a double-edged sword. So not the best situation to find yourself in. So what else could you do? You could sell an asset. Can be a decent option. You'll have something in the building, like maybe you're a 4 or 5 location place. One location is not doing very well. You could sell that property and use that money to do the upgrades in the other. Yeah, but that's the opposite of growth, isn't it? All right. So we want to grow our business. We don't want to make it smaller. Now, big businesses will sell off assets and use that money to buy new assets, and they're always updating their image and stuff like that by cutting ties with a piece of property that they no longer need or whatever, and that can be done very, very effectively. But when you have to spend money on a capital improvement and you don't have the money and you sell something you really don't want to sell, well then that's not good. Okay, but it can be a decent thing. All right, sell equity or ownership. Now, what do I mean by that? Those of you who understand the stock market know what I'm talking about. Publicly traded companies will sell stocks to get that increased money. That can be good if it's done wisely. Just to give a, I'm not a financial wizard when it comes to these things, but just a basic overview for those who don't know. It's not free money. You're not printing money when you're printing um, new shares in your company. The total amount of money that's the shares, if the shares are worth so much money, and that total of all the shares you have has to be a realistic number. If you look around and all your assets and everything that you do is only worth $2 million, and you have $4 million worth of stock out there, eventually something's going to happen, right? You're overvalued. Okay, so you don't want to keep on doing that, right? Um, Sometimes going public like that or getting in investors it's a good option. But the bottom line is what you should be using that equity for, selling that equity for, is for moving, for producing growth, not maintaining because things have gotten deteriorated and you have to do an expense that you can't afford. So you create more, you sell equity. That's not a good look, okay? But again, it makes sense when you do that. And the whole reason why this whole system was developed is because people want to grow, right? They want to take that next step. So they might make their business increase and increase and increase. You don't want to sell equity just to maintain the same, right? That is when you get yourself in some serious trouble, all right? So anyway, we want to take a look at everything, their lifetime cost analysis. A lifetime cost analysis is basically straightforward. using determined measures for checking out the economic valuation of the building. Okay, you want to look at your initial cost. Okay, you want to look at your energy cost and over time. What is my energy cost going to be over time? Now, again, many decisions that you make in the beginning will influence some of these other costs, right? So more money on windows, more money on a roof will reduce these costs. So these are all things you need to balance out. Operation, maintenance, and repair cost. Again, a slate roof gets worked on once a decade or once 100 years or whatever, or replaced once every. I mean, there's slate roofs out there that are 400 years old, right? Asphalt roofs, not so much, right? So you want to talk about maintenance and repair costs. You want to look at replacement costs. How much would it cost to replace this thing? So, with inflation and everything, sometimes there's the high school that I grew up in. It was, built in the 1890s, and they did a study of it when I was graduating high school, and it would have been billions of dollars to replace something that they didn't pay that much for, because to replace it, it just the way with inflation and just different things, replacement cost is very, very, very expensive sometimes. So you want to take into consideration this when you're evaluating anything. So create a property that's going to stay and not have to be replaced. Okay, so those are some of the things you want to look at. Residual value. Okay. Residual value. When it's all said and done, when the piece of property, whether it's something in the property like a piece of equipment or the property itself, when it's all said and done, you are done with it, right? Will it have value? Okay. Now, a building will always have value as long as it's not burnt down or something like that. But real estate is going to have value. But let's look at something within the building, like a large piece of equipment, right? You get 15 years out of a piece of equipment. Right? You spend $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 for something you're going to get 15 years out of. Okay? At the end of that 15-year life cycle, does it have any value? Okay? Is it something that you have to pay somebody to take out and take to the dump, or will you get $10,000, or if it's a $50,000 piece of equipment, will you get $1,000 worth of scrap out of it? Right? That's something you need to take into consideration. All right? And then non-financial costs. I briefly touched on this before. Non-financial costs about the more expensive slate roof has a benefit beyond cost. It has increased the curb appeal. In the hospitality industry or any industry, when you want people to come to you, right? Come into your building, come into your restaurant, come into your hotel, come into your casino, whatever it is, you want them to want to come in there. You want to do everything you can to make it enticing. So having a nice slate roof, having the more expensive siding options, and all those different things taken into consideration. And that is one that people don't look at a lot. They don't look at the non-financial benefits and cost. And sometimes there's non-financial cost to making a decision. Again, generally speaking, when you make the cheaper decision, people look at something like they don't want to go there. All right. So there's a whole lot more in this chapter. That's chapter 3 of your book that I didn't go over. I just touched on a few things. I just really wanted to give you guys an idea that the decisions you make in your building and the equipment that you buy and the systems that you spend your money on have a huge impact on the business, right? So planning properly for it, having a good reserve fund, capital improvements fund, whatever you want to call it, is very, very important, and having an understanding of how it all works together and the financial part of it. All right, so that's it for this video. Until next week.